At 4:47 this morning, a winter storm system, unlike anything in modern records, slammed into the eastern United States with the force of a meteorological nightmare. Over 100 people are confirmed dead across New York and Mississippi. More than 1 million households sit in the dark without power, and emergency responders are calling this the deadliest winter disaster in American history. Picture highways transformed into frozen graveyards, entire neighborhoods buried under snowdrifts measuring 8 feet high, and temperatures plunging to -30 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills that can kill exposed skin in under 5 minutes. But here's what has meteorologists completely stunned. This storm is defying every rule in the forecasting playbook, intensifying when it should be weakening, stalling over populated areas when models predicted it would move offshore, and generating snowfall rates of 6 inches per hour that shouldn't be physically possible this far south. Emergency declarations are now active in 14 states as the National Weather Service warns the worst may still be ahead. Is this just a freak weather event? Or are we witnessing the birth of a new class of winter superstorm that could redefine what cold season disasters look like in a changing climate? The first warning signs appeared on satellite imagery 72 hours before landfall. A low-pressure system forming over the Texas Panhandle, nothing unusual by itself, but the atmospheric conditions surrounding it were anything but normal. The jet stream, that river of high-altitude wind that steers weather systems across North America, had buckled into an extreme omega block pattern, a configuration so rare that some meteorologists go entire careers without seeing one this pronounced. Cold Arctic air was pouring south through a deep trough over the Great Plains, while a stubborn high-pressure ridge over the Atlantic refused to budge, creating a meteorological trap. The developing storm had nowhere to go but up, and up it went. Within 18 hours, central pressure dropped 24 millibars, meeting the technical definition of bombogenesis, the rapid intensification that turns ordinary storms into monsters. But this wasn't happening over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, where bomb cyclones are somewhat expected. This was happening over land, over the Mississippi River Valley, and it was accelerating. The National Weather Service office in Jackson, Mississippi, issued its first blizzard warning at 11 p.m. on Tuesday, a rare enough event that the text triggered automated alerts across the region. Senior meteorologist David Chen remembers the disbelief in the forecast room. In 23 years, I've never issued a blizzard warning for central Mississippi. We checked the models 3 times. When the numbers came back the same, we knew we were looking at something historic. By midnight, the first flakes were falling in Memphis. By 2 a.m., visibility had dropped to 0 and snowfall rates spiked to 4 inches per hour, a rate more common in the lake-effect snowbelts of upstate New York than the Deep South. The storm's northern edge, meanwhile, was already hammering western New York, where Buffalo and Rochester braced for impacts that would make their notorious lake-effect storms look tame by comparison. At 3:15 a.m., the Emergency Operations Center in Albany received the first distress call. A semi-truck jackknifed on Interstate 90 near Syracuse, blocking all eastbound lanes. Within minutes, reports flooded in. Multiple vehicle pileups, cars sliding off overpasses, drivers trapped as snow buried their vehicles faster than plows could respond. By dawn, over 200 vehicles sat abandoned on New York highways, their occupants rescued by National Guard helicopters or huddled inside, burning through tank after tank of gas just to stay warm. The death toll began to climb. In Oswego County, a family of 4 was found unresponsive in their sedan, overcome by carbon monoxide as snow blocked their exhaust pipe. Near Watertown, an elderly man collapsed while shoveling his driveway, the exertion in sub-zero cold proving too much for his heart. Each new report added to a grim tally that emergency managers knew was only beginning. In Mississippi, the chaos unfolded with a speed that caught even seasoned emergency planners off guard. Jackson, a city of 150,000 utterly unprepared for winter weather of this magnitude, woke to streets impassable and temperatures in free fall. The city owns exactly 12 snowplows, machines designed for the occasional dusting, not the 18 inches that fell in less than 6 hours. Mayor Jonathan Hayes stood in the operations center, watching real-time reports scroll across monitors, his voice tight with frustration. "We've requested help from FEMA, from the National Guard, from neighboring states, but everyone is buried. No one has equipment to spare." Across the state, rural roads became death traps. In Hinds County, emergency responders found 3 bodies in separate incidents. People who had ventured out into the storm and simply disappeared into the white. Search and rescue teams, many of whom had never trained for blizzard conditions, struggled to navigate snowdrifts that swallowed their vehicles whole. The power grid began to fail in waves, starting with the oldest infrastructure and cascading outward. In Rochester, New York, a transmission tower buckled under the weight of ice accumulation exceeding 2 inches, cutting electricity to 80,000 homes in an instant. Utility crews scrambled, but the conditions were impossible. Winds gusting to 70 miles per hour snapped power lines like thread, while snowdrifts buried substations under 10 feet of compacted snow. By midday Wednesday, over 600,000 customers in New York sat in the dark, and the number was climbing. In Mississippi, the grid fared even worse. The state's infrastructure, built for heat waves and hurricanes, had no resilience against ice storms of this intensity. Freezing rain coated every surface before the snow arrived, adding a glassy shell that turned trees into bombs. When the wind picked up, entire forests of ice-laden branches came crashing down, taking power lines with them. In Jackson alone, 90% of the city lost electricity. Hospitals switched to backup generators, but fuel supplies were limited and roads too dangerous for resupply convoys. Inside the command center at FEMA headquarters in Washington, the situation boards lit up with red. This wasn't a single disaster, it was 2 simultaneous catastrophes separated by 1,000 miles, each overwhelming local capacity and demanding federal intervention on a scale rarely seen outside of major hurricanes. Administrator Rebecca Torres briefed the White House at 10 a.m., her assessment blunt. "We are facing a mass casualty event with critical infrastructure failure across multiple states. Without immediate deployment of federal assets, the death toll will climb into the hundreds." Within the hour, the president signed emergency declarations for New York, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and 6 other states, activating the full weight of federal disaster response. The National Weather Service's analysis of the storm's structure revealed something deeply unsettling. Meteorologists at the Weather Prediction Center in College Park, Maryland, pored over satellite loops and radar data, searching for precedents. What they found was a storm that had no business existing in its current form. The moisture content, the atmospheric instability, the sheer energy feeding the system, all pointed to a hybrid event, part nor'easter, part Southern Plains blizzard, and part something entirely new. Dr. Melissa Grant, a research meteorologist with NOAA, pulled up the pressure traces and shook her head. The central pressure bottomed out at 972 millibars. For context, that's lower than many Category 1 hurricanes, but this is over land, in winter, with no tropical moisture source to explain the intensity. She pointed to the satellite imagery showing a tight spiral of clouds, almost hurricane-like in its symmetry. The storm had developed an eye-like feature, a clear center where winds calmed while the surrounding bands dumped snow at rates that broke every local record. The human cost became clearer as daylight broke on Thursday. In Buffalo, emergency rooms overflowed with hypothermia cases, frostbite injuries, and heart attacks triggered by shoveling snow. Dr. Sarah Patel, working a 16-hour shift at Erie County Medical Center, described the influx as relentless. We've treated 40 patients in the last 12 hours for cold-related injuries. Some of them will lose fingers or toes. One man was found after spending 8 hours trapped in his car. His core body temperature was 88 degrees when paramedics got to him. He's alive, but barely. In Mississippi, the toll was even grimmer. Rural communities, cut off by impassable roads and downed trees, faced a deadly isolation. In Lauderdale County, a woman in labor was stranded for 6 hours before a helicopter could reach her. The hospital just 12 miles away, but utterly unreachable by road. In Rankin County, an elderly couple on oxygen died when their backup generator ran out of fuel. The delivery truck scheduled to arrive that morning stuck in a ditch 3 miles from their home. Emergency shelters opened across both states, but the demand outstripped capacity almost immediately. In Syracuse, the Red Cross set up cots in the Civic Center, but by nightfall, over 800 people crowded into a space designed for 300. Volunteers worked around the clock, distributing blankets, hot meals, and desperately needed medications. In Jackson, the situation was even more chaotic. With most of the city without power and temperatures inside homes dropping into the 30s, thousands sought refuge. But many of the designated shelters were themselves without heat or electricity, forcing last-minute relocations to schools and churches with working generators. The strain on resources became a crisis within the crisis. Supplies of bottled water, baby formula, and insulin ran low. Pharmacies, many of them closed or inaccessible, couldn't refill prescriptions. Diabetic patients rationed their medication, knowing that help might not arrive for days. The storm's refusal to move became the defining mystery. By Friday morning, meteorologists expected the system to drift offshore, carried by the jet stream toward the Atlantic. Instead, it stalled, wobbling in place over the Appalachian Mountains like a spinning top that refused to fall. The Omega block that had steered it into position now held it there, locked in place by atmospheric forces that defied the models. Every new forecast run showed the same impossible result. No movement, no weakening, just hour after hour of relentless snow and wind. In some areas of upstate New York, the total accumulation topped 40 inches, a number that shattered century-old records and buried entire neighborhoods under snow, deeper than first-floor windows. In Mississippi, the storm's southern fringe continued to pump moisture and cold air inland, extending the disaster zone across Alabama and into Georgia. The infrastructure failures exposed weaknesses that had been building for decades. In New York, aging water mains, never designed to handle sustained temperatures below -20 degrees, began to burst. In Rochester, a major break flooded 6 city blocks, the water freezing almost instantly and creating a skating rink of ice that emergency vehicles couldn't cross. Repair crews working in conditions that would be dangerous in summer faced frostbite and equipment failures. Backhoes wouldn't start, torches wouldn't light, and the ground was frozen so solid that excavation became nearly impossible. In Mississippi, the situation was even more dire. The state's water treatment plants, many of them already struggling with aging infrastructure, lost power and couldn't pump. Boil water notices went out, but without electricity, boiling wasn't an option. By Saturday, over 500,000 people in Mississippi had no access to safe drinking water. The National Guard deployment grew to the largest domestic operation since Hurricane Katrina. Over 15,000 troops mobilized across the affected states, operating high-clearance vehicles equipped with plows and rescue gear. Their missions ranged from clearing highways to conducting door-to-door welfare checks in rural areas. In Chautauqua County, New York, a Guard unit found an entire assisted living facility without power for 36 hours, the staff using every blanket they could find to keep 60 elderly residents from freezing. The evacuation, conducted in whiteout conditions, took 4 hours and saved lives that would have been lost by morning. In Mississippi, Guard helicopters became lifelines, airlifting insulin to diabetics, oxygen to patients on ventilators, and emergency generators to hospitals running on fumes. As the death toll passed 100, the questions grew louder. How did this happen? Why were the forecasts so far off? And why, in an age of supercomputers and satellite technology, did a winter storm manage to kill more Americans than many hurricanes? The National Weather Service faced a reckoning. Internal reviews began even as the storm continued, digging into the model outputs from the week prior. What emerged was a troubling pattern. The European and American forecast models had both flagged the potential for a significant winter storm, but neither captured the intensity or the stall. The algorithms, trained on decades of historical data, had no reference points for a system this powerful forming this far south and lingering this long. Dr. Grant, speaking to a closed-door briefing at NOAA headquarters, put it plainly. Our models are built on the climate of the past. They assume that winter storms behave within certain bounds. This storm didn't. It exceeded every threshold we use to define extreme events. If the climate is shifting, if the boundaries are changing, then our tools are already outdated. The political fallout began before the snow stopped falling. In Mississippi, state legislators demanded answers. Why weren't emergency supplies pre-positioned? Why did the power grid collapse so completely? Governor Rachel Armstrong defended her administration's response, pointing to the unprecedented nature of the storm, but critics were unrelenting. You can't call yourself unprepared when scientists have been warning about extreme weather for years, one senator snapped during a televised hearing. In New York, Governor Michael Torres faced similar scrutiny. Despite the state's experience with winter weather, the scale of the disaster exposed gaps. Shelter capacity was insufficient. Mutual aid agreements with neighboring states proved useless when everyone was hit at once, and communication failures left some communities in the dark, literally and figuratively, for days. For the survivors, the storm's legacy will last far longer than the snow. In Jackson, families who lost loved ones to the cold, to crashes, to medical emergencies that couldn't be reached in time, gathered for makeshift vigils. In Buffalo, a mother stood outside the hospital where her son fought for his life after his car slid into a frozen creek. Across both states, entire communities faced the grim task of rebuilding lives shattered by a storm that no one thought possible. The economic damage, still being tallied, is expected to exceed $10 billion. Lost wages, destroyed infrastructure, ruined crops, and the cost of emergency response, all adding to a bill that will take years to pay. As cleanup begins and the snow finally starts to melt, one fact remains inescapable. This storm was not a fluke. The atmospheric conditions that created it, the jet stream pattern, the temperature extremes, the moisture transport, all are consistent with what climate scientists have been predicting for years. Warmer Arctic air, weakening the polar vortex, allowing cold air to plunge south. More moisture in the atmosphere fueling heavier precipitation. And a climate system that no longer follows the old rules, producing events that fall outside the historical record. The winter storm that killed over 100 Americans and left 1 million in the dark is not just a tragedy. It's a warning. The next one could be worse, and the question isn't if it will happen again, but when.